Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's luncheon event at the Rumi Forum in Washington, D.C. I'm Tariq Shaffi. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Frances Burwell, and the title of her talk is Turkey's EU Ambition, Can We Avoid Derailment? Dr. Burwell is director of the Atlantic Council's program on Transatlantic Relations, where she manages projects designed to enhance understanding of U.S.-European interaction. Her research focuses on transatlantic relations generally, with an emphasis on U.S.-EU relations and on the development of the European Union's foreign and defense policies. She is the co-editor of The United States and Europe in the Global Arena and of The Evolution of U.S.-Turkey Relations in a Transatlantic Context. She has served as rapporteur or co-author for a number of Atlantic Council policy papers, including Turkey on the Threshold, Europe's Decision and U.S. Interests. Welcome to the Rumi Forum, Dr. Burwell. I was wondering if you could start off by giving us a fairly brief historical perspective as to when this application, as it were, by Turkey to join the EU started, some of the roadblocks, some of the sponsors, some of the opposition also, and bring us up to date, and then go forward, if you could.
Sure. Let me say first, and that many thanks to the Rumi Foundation for inviting me to do this. I wanted to let people know, before starting into the history, that I am primarily an EU watcher. I have spent a fair amount of time watching Turkey, but particularly with coverage of this issue. And I thought that in discussing this issue today, what I would provide is a more European perspective. I would like to take seriously what I understand is one of the Rumi Forum's missions, which is to enhance cross-cultural understanding and recognition of the points of view of others. So at times, what I am going to say may sound different, certainly to what one hears in the debate in Turkey, but I hope that it will be useful in understanding where the European Union is coming from. Turkey has been an applicant for EU membership for quite a long time. It first filed for a customs union, and that was blocked for quite some time, but is now in operation. In 1999 or thereabouts, it was granted formal candidate stature, which is an official term to be a candidate for a member. But it was also decided that Turkey did not meet what was called the Copenhagen criteria at that point. Copenhagen criteria have to do with your economic development, and particularly a market economy, democracy, and some other elements, particularly in the social sphere. But by 2004, the European Union decided that Turkey had met these criteria sufficiently so that it could begin the accession negotiation process. Now, this is a complicated, very long process. Turkey actually began the process a full year later, because once you've been given the opportunity to open negotiations, there's a long process of going through Turkish laws and EU laws and seeing how they differ, doing a benchmarking. And it wasn't until that was completed that any of the formal negotiations could open. Now, the EU has expanded throughout its history. It started out as 6, then went to 12, then went to 15. It's currently at 27. The EU has become quite practiced in figuring out what an applicant country needs to do in terms of its laws. The EU, though, is also developing the whole time that this goes on. So if a country enters membership negotiations, the EU will have a certain number of laws called the acquis communautaire. And these can cover everything from environmental regulation to social policy to financial services regulation, all sorts of issues. Mm-hmm. It is now believed or estimated that more than 50% of Britain's laws, France's laws, Germany's laws, anyone who's in the Union comes from the Union, and the national parliaments only ratify those and translate them, if you will, into national law. So it's an extensive process that goes very deeply into all countries that are members of the European Union, down to how you would label vegetables that are sold at a greengrocery. There was a big fuss in the United Kingdom when they were made to add metric weights to the vegetables, the carrots or whatever that were for sale.
There's also a debate on the ugly vegetables.
Yes, the quality. Are those of sufficient quality if they're weird looking? So there are all sorts of rules and regulations. So when a country starts, the EU will have a certain number of rules. Most countries have spent anywhere from 7 to 10 years negotiating. And by the time they get there, the EU has many more regulations. A few years ago, we were talking about 80,000 pages. We're now talking about over 100,000 pages. And you, if you are an applicant, you have to go with the EU and adopt all those new regulations. So it's a very difficult and lengthy process. Turkey has opened what are called chapters. There are 35 or 36 chapters. And Turkey has opened 10 of those. And it has finished one, but my understanding is it's not formally signed off on. The difficulty with the chapters, and the chapters are on things like environmental policy, financial services. There are a few chapters like economic and monetary union that are specific to membership, and I'll come to those in a minute. But you must receive, to open a chapter, all the member states must agree that you can open that chapter. And then all the member states must agree that you can finish that chapter. So one member state can be a block.
Unanimity.
Unanimity on this. Yeah. Bringing a new member in is one of the most important decisions that the Union makes. And it has not always been easy, not just for Turkey. So let me say a couple of general things and then say where we are specifically.
Sure.
I've just come back from Brussels, and I talked there with some politicians and also some of the officials of the European Union. And I have to say that this is one of the most dire times that I have seen in terms of Turkey's application process. I suggested this title about avoiding derailment before I left, because I knew that there were issues, and it's always good to have an interesting topic when you're giving a provocative topic. But I came back concerned that we are in fact heading for a derailment or a train wreck, whatever metaphor you wish to use. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First off, the negotiating process has slowed considerably, in part because of this need for unanimity in opening chapters, and I'll come back to that. Secondly, we have a couple of deadlines looming in the late part of 2009. One is the deadline for the Ankara protocols. This is something that in 2006, you may know that 10 countries joined the EU, most of Central Europe. And Cyprus was also one of the new members, as was Malta. Turkey was required to extend its customs union to all the new members, and that meant opening its ports to Cypriot-flagged ships and its airports to Cypriot carriers. And Turkey has not wanted to do this. But it cannot discriminate between member states. And so this has put Turkey and the EU in a bind. The other issue that is coming up is the Cyprus negotiations themselves. We all recognize the difficulties that arose after the rejection of the referendum by the Greek Cypriot population. There now is a new UN effort underway with new leadership on the Greek Cypriot side, but there are also issues about whether that will be completed in time. before the Turkish Cypriots face a presidential election in, I believe, April of next year. One of the interesting changes, a shift in mood that I have felt in Europe is the following. When you would talk to officials who were responsible for enlargement in the past, they would say, well, Turkey legally has been granted candidate status. So the question is not if, it is when. And it's largely up to Turkey to figure out how soon it can adopt these 100,000 pages of laws and prove that it can adhere to those laws, not just pass the law, but actually implement them throughout the country. So it was an attitude that, well, there's a problem, but we're just going to keep working at it. We're not going as fast as we'd like, but we're going to keep working. But there has been a change. And I think there now is more of an attitude of, can we keep this going? Are we heading for a train wreck? And aside from these particular deadlines that I've mentioned, what seems to have happened, the nearest that I can figure it out, is that both in Turkey and in the EU, or at least it is perceived in Turkey by Europeans, in both cases, the domestic politics now encourage, in Europe, anti-Turkish statements, and in Turkey, the domestic politics have slowed the reform process that is necessary. So in both areas, there is less incentive to move forward for domestic political reasons. Now, we know politicians will say all sorts of things no matter what to get votes. That's not unusual. And to some degree, it's always hard to judge what is actually political speech and what they really think and want. But I have to say that I think that the attitudes have hardened on both sides. Why has this happened in Europe? And I think that to a great degree it is a matter of a leadership change. In 2004, when Turkey was given the right to open negotiations, we had Jacques Chirac and Gerhard Schroeder in office. And despite the Americans' frequent disagreements with those two leaders, they did support Turkish membership. We now have Angela Merkel, and even more so, we have Nicolas Sarkozy. And he is someone who has made very clear, repeatedly, his opposition to Turkish membership. And I understand that that creates a lot of backlash in Turkey. It would be unhuman if it did not. But he is partly also speaking to a European public that is increasingly skeptical. And why are they skeptical? In part, it's because of the recent enlargement. Europe has a huge case of indigestion. And they have basically brought in a huge number of states that are transitional in their economies, in their societies. There's now a consensus among people in the EU that perhaps Romania and Bulgaria were brought in a little fast, that perhaps their standards of anti-corruption and their political standards and their economic standards and educational standards are not exactly where they should be. This is not to say that they don't want them in the Union, but maybe they should just have waited a couple more years. There is within the Union a belief, which I think is an accurate one, that their leverage to encourage reform exists before membership and less so afterwards. So the lesson that you would draw if you're a European and you're looking at a country that maybe isn't quite where you'd want them is that you should get them where you want them before you say yes, finally, on that application. Because afterwards, they become one of those sitting at the table, and it becomes very difficult to make them change their ways once they are one of your peers, right?
You talked, Fran, about Sarkozy. He said some incendiary remarks about Turkey not being culturally Western, not sharing same political, cultural, I guess, aspirations. he's also said that location-wise, Turkey straddles two continents. It's really in Asia Minor,
Right.
and Turkey does indeed pose a unique challenge for other member nations, does it not?
It absolutely does. Turkey is a very large country. I remember when the Berlin Wall fell, and many of us had hesitations about a united Germany. It would suddenly become a much bigger member. And the Union was never really designed to have one large member. They've survived the unification of Germany. It has sometimes been difficult, but it's also true that as soon as Turkey enters the Union, it will have more representatives in the European Parliament than any other country.
Interesting.
So, and it will be, because it is so big, it will be impossible to deny, politically impossible, legally possible but politically impossible, to deny Turkey a commissioner, which is one of the top spots in EU policymaking. Other countries are now facing a future where they may not always have a commissioner. It would be, I think we can expect within the next few years to see the Balkans, the Baltics, for example, rotate a commissioner. Because you will not be able to have, by the time you bring in Croatia, Turkey, and then the Balkan states, which are also on the membership route. So you're probably talking about a union of 35. So you can't have 35 decision makers sitting at one table. That just gets too complicated. So once Turkey comes in, it will immediately play an important role. And there is fear and there is concern because Turkey is different. It is largely Muslim. I think for many in Western Europe, they are not as aware as they should be about the changing nature of their own populations. And I think that's something that they will have to deal with. I think the issue of Turkey's geographical position is another one that is difficult. And it is something that it depends on how you view the world. Do you want Turkey to be a barrier that protects you from Syria, Iran, Iraq, or do your interests dictate that you play an active role with those countries? In which case, Turkey has already established relations with those countries in a very intense way. And particularly under the new foreign minister, Davutoglu, we can expect to see more of that, more of a regional policy in Turkey. And in the EU, it's very difficult to say that that's a pure good. It's something that makes Europeans nervous. And there is a debate in Europe about its role as a global actor. Will it be regional or will it be more global? And we in the United States face this when we try and encourage our European allies to contribute more troops in Afghanistan and other places in that region. So this very definitely is something, these questions that you have raised about culture and about location that President Sarkozy raises and that you've raised, they are at the heart of the debate. And they are at the heart of how European citizens feel. And right now, you have fewer than 48%, for example, who think that the most recent enlargement, which was all Central European states, was a good thing. That's not an encouraging figure. The public opinion numbers for Turkey are at 31% in favor among Europeans.
Oh, that's interesting.
55% opposed, and only about 14% or so undecided. That's not a high undecided rate. It's not like there's a lot of people flex there, if I can put it that way. So there is a significant obstacle in European public opinion. However, unlike in the days of Chirac and Schroeder, you don't see a lot of what one might call European leadership on the debate. You see actually more European leaders reinforcing the concerns and not encouraging a real debate about whether Turkey should come into the Union. Is it a strategic partner, or is there some other role?
Do you see the foot dragging by opponents of Turkey joining, reflecting their own citizens' idea of Turkey not joining as full member? And if that's the case, then would they put this to a referendum? And then they'll say, well, our citizens have decided no, because there is supposed to be a unanimous decision
Right.
among member nations, and that's the end of that.
At the end of this process, every member state will ratify the accession treaty that approves whether Turkey can come in or not. The European Parliament will also give its assent.
Mm-hmm.
And some states will require a referendum, very few of those, however. It's, to me, unclear. The French first did have a referendum, and then they were debating whether to withdraw that need for a referendum. It's unclear to me where it's ended up. But you will have to get the agreement of, we can probably assume 28 member states, because Croatia is likely to come in before Turkey. So you would have to get the agreement of 28 member states. And it would depend on whether those governments were willing to go against public opinion. It would also, if we think that this is likely to be 10 years away, public opinion may have changed considerably. So what is happening right now is that in the EU, you also have a view that things are not moving forward in Turkey. So, for example, let's go back to the chapters for a minute. In the chapters, 10 have been opened, and one has been completed, which is a science and research one. So it's pretty technical. And most of the chapters that are under negotiation are pretty technical. Because of the Ankara Protocol, because Turkey has not opened its ports, 8 more chapters that it would have been ready, that it's ready to open, the Europeans would like to start negotiating, they cannot start.
Mm-hmm.
And they cannot conclude any others because of this, the lack of the ports being open.
Is that because of Turkey's desire to protect its own ports?
I think, well, I wouldn't say protect the ports, but I think that Turkey feels, with some justice, that the Cypriots have not been the Cyprus government has not been as forthcoming in the negotiations over the island's future and resolving the question on the island.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this really comes out of the failure of the referendum on the Annan Plan. And Turkey would like to see movement in Cyprus before it opens its ports to Cypriot shipping. That's understandable, but it's contrary to what is required to move forward in EU negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the issues that I think Turkey has not yet grappled with. We say negotiations. That's not right. It's not a negotiation. And every candidate state has eventually found this out. They don't say, would you like to adopt this chapter on environmental protection? They say, no. When are you going to adopt it? And by what date can we send our inspectors around? And when is your parliament going to pass it? So it's not a negotiation. It is about the Turkey coming up to or adapting EU law and doing the things, for example, that are required to be a member. And to be a member, you must recognize all the other members. It would be inconceivable to have a member in the EU that does not recognize all the other members. So, and does not open their ports. You know, if Latvia did not open its ports to Germany, forget it. So this is one of the difficulties that Turkey will face, because it is attempting to negotiate in the real sense to get a bargain vis-a-vis Cyprus.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't hold the cards.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 4 other chapters, key chapters, but usually negotiated late in the day, that have been France has put a block on. These are chapters like Economic and Monetary Union that the French have defined as being only for members. The French position is that Turkey can negotiate all the other chapters and could have a privileged partnership or something similar. Only members can do these other 4 chapters, and therefore Turkey cannot. Right now, there's little prospect of that block being lifted, and it will take a considerable amount of political capital to shift President Sarkozy. As a result of these things, the feeling in Europe is increasingly that the negotiations are running out of things they can negotiate. They also are looking for more reforms on the Turkish side. And this is where there has been a shift in the last year. There was a feeling that the AK Party government was going full speed ahead. They had seen more reforms in the first part of the government than the EU had expected. In the last year, 18 months, that has slowed down considerably. The EU looked for more reforms after the March elections, but they're not seeing it. They're seeing it on economic issues, and that's great, that's necessary, but they're not seeing it on some of the other issues that are of prime importance and that they believe would also be good in winning over the publics in Europe. Some of the political reform issues, judicial reform, some of the opening of the Halki Seminary, for example, protection of Alevi worship places, an anti-corruption strategy. There's a list of these things, but they all are kind of focused on these bigger political issues, religious tolerance issues, more expression, more ability to use Kurdish in public spaces, although they're very much boosted by the Turkish television station that has opened and is now broadcasting. So that was a big positive check mark. But they are anxious to see the government in Ankara put forward more of these reforms, which they can then take not only to open chapters, but to use to say, Turkey is moving where we want it to move in terms of political reform.
Friend, just to stick with Cyprus and perhaps Greece for a moment, from their perspective, could you not argue that they could lift these objections, let Turkey in, and then they'll have a bigger clout once they're part of the EU, to then get these negotiations going, and they'll have a better feel and more of a chance to change Turkey's habits or practical obligations in their favor?
Well, one could. However, no one will let Turkey in until it has met the acquis communautaire, this 100,000 and growing pages of rules and regulations. So no matter, under the best of circumstances, Turkey has a number of years.
Nice.
Now, what I would say to you is that would it be good for Cyprus, and Greece to a lesser extent has been a problem, but Cyprus especially, to lift some of the blocks on some of the chapters where it has them? I think it would be. I think that it would generate a lot of goodwill. I think it would help speed things along. And I think that one of the most effective instruments of reform in Turkey is to have the European Commission negotiating and saying, you must pass this bill, you must sign the optional protocol on the Convention Against Torture and stuff like that, other things that they have on their wish list. That will help move Turkey forward. I can understand how Turkey does not want to move when it won't see progress on the chapters. But we have a bit of a chicken and an egg problem here. And the question is, who gives on what? And then there's the question of, what role does the United States play? When Turkey got permission to start the chapters, the United States played a major role in terms of advocating on Turkey's behalf in Europe. And it depends who you talk to, they will tell you that this was good or this was bad. It was effective or it was really painful. We're in a different place now. We don't have Schroeder and Chirac anymore. And we have this post-2004 enlargement indigestion in Europe. I think everyone here probably knows that President Obama made a very forward statement about Turkish membership when he was in Ankara or Istanbul.
He did, yes.
And I was in France when that happened. I was in Paris, and you know how when you're in the hotel room, you turn on the TV and it's just kind of on, right? Well, repeatedly I saw President Sarkozy looking very angry, saying this was Europe's decision, and the American president, charming though he may be, does not have anything to say about this.
Oh, wow.
So I think that there is I understand why the Obama administration wanted to say that to Turkey. And I understand why at that point it wanted to say that, and I think that was good. But I think going forward we have to realize that such issues can be provocative. Now, on the other hand, there is a deal, I think, and I think the U.S. can help with this deal. But it requires more subtlety. There is an issue on Turkey and NATO and the EU. Currently in Afghanistan, we have a NATO operation. We also have EU police. They've been trying to share intelligence about where are the safe places, etc., to go, to send the police. And it's been difficult because Turkey has blocked the sharing of intelligence with the EU for some complicated reasons that have to do with Cyprus, of all things, of course. Won't surprise you. Turkey also wants to be closer to the EU on defense issues. It used to be very close when, before the EU, there was the WEU, the Western European Union. And since that no longer exists, Turkey has been a little bit cut out of some of the decision-making about European military operations and civil operations. The EU has also, I think, not fully lived up to some promises it made about when it would consult with Turkey, when it's going to launch an operation close to Turkey. I think there is a place for the United States to broker an arrangement where Turkey would get closer access to the EU foreign policy and defense policy. It's already a major contributor to many EU military missions. And in return, Turkey would open one of its ports to Cypriot shipping, at least provisionally, to see then if maybe Cyprus would allow the Turkish Cypriots to have direct trade with the EU, which the European Commission would like to do, but legally has been unable to do. So I think there is a place for the U.S. to broker some kind of deal like this that can at least get us over some of these deadlines that we face in late '09. We will still have the problem of the European public and of Mr. Sarkozy and his very strong views on this question. But at least it will let us move forward. And then, with a reinvigorated push by Turkey for reform, I think we can start to move some of the European public views over the longer term. We are talking about a 10-year process, not a quick process. But I think there is room. But first we must get over these initial issues in 2009.
Also, typical European bureaucracy moves like
very
snail's
slow.
pace.
Very slow.
It's not just France and Sarkozy, though.
No.
The EU members have their own historical relationships with Turkey. For example, Austria. Christian Europe versus Muslim Ottomans. The Brits are very keen on the Turks joining the EU. So it varies, and when you talk about there being unanimous consent, it makes it so difficult, doesn't it, to come together?
It is very difficult, and I think the one country you didn't mention was Germany. Angela Merkel heads the Christian Democratic Union, which has long been not in favor of Turkish membership, and she herself has been quieter than President Sarkozy, but she certainly does not object to him and his statements.
Fanning the flames.
It's somewhat ironic because Germany has one of the highest Turkish populations.
That's right.
And in fact, the Social Democrats under Gerhard Schroeder came to see this as an important constituency, and were courting the Turks and pushing for them to get citizenship and be able to vote, just as an American politician would vote for any ethnic interest group.
Exactly.
So there is quite a bit of difference there, and it does make it seem an insurmountable task. How can you ever get unanimity among these countries? But what I've seen in Europe is the way opinion can swing, not suddenly, but it can coalesce around an idea. I think that what Turkey needs to do and Europe needs to do is to figure out a way to expand their relationship so that the discussion is not always about enlargement and membership. When Turks show up and that's all they want to talk about, Europeans get defensive. EU Europeans get defensive. When EU Europeans want to talk about how Turkey's not qualified for membership, Turks get defensive, quite normally. I mean, that's the normal thing to do. But there are huge numbers of interests, economic interests between the two are very, very close and getting closer. Interests of energy. Later this month, we will see the Nabucco pipeline deal signed. Turkey will become an important transit country in terms of the EU having energy supplies not directly from Russia. And if Iraq and Iran come online with gas, Turkey will be even more important. So there are all sorts of issues where they could work together and create something that more naturally could lead to membership in the long term.
That impacts the Russian-Ukraine gas deal, right?
Yes.
Russia won't be pleased then if that happens.
No, they won't be. But Europe is determined to have more sources.
Correct.
More diverse sources. And they, in fact, after Russia turned off the gas on Ukraine the most recent time, the Europeans Commission, the EU, decided to put major financing behind the Nabucco pipeline. Then there was an issue with Turkey in terms of the amount that Turkey would charge to be a transit country, but that's now been resolved.
So how do you see this process evolving, say in the next, I know that it will be several years, but and public opinion will go up and down. Is it going the right direction as far as Turkey is concerned?
I think right now it is not. And this is the problem, is that we are, if I can put it this way, we are still waiting for the relationship to hit bottom. And this coming fall and winter will be the test. Can we get past this deadline on Turkey opening its ports under the Ankara Protocol, even with a modest little fix? Will we be at that point so close to a Cyprus settlement that the EU will find a way to finesse that in hopes that they can put it into a package with a Cyprus settlement and resolve the whole issue? So if we can do those things, if we can reach an understanding about perhaps an enlarged Turkish role in European defense policy, which is of great interest to the United States, particularly this year as NATO writes a new strategic concept and thinks about its relationship with the EU. If we can do those things, then I think the public will start to shift a little bit. I think we will see a more, once you begin the march of negotiations in the chapters, things just kind of chug along. Right now, though, what we're seeing is an inability to chug along. If I can go back to my derailment thing, the train keeps picking up new chapters, but it can't actually progress past any of them. And so it's not really going forward. It's stuck. If we can get it moving, then it becomes a project that the EU and Turkey can do together. If it's not moving, then it just becomes a place where people can accuse each other of not living up to agreements, of bad faith, etc., out of frustration, if nothing else. So the question is to get over this hump, start the negotiations on chapters, get the process moving.
Well, excellent. Thank you for your keen insight. We'll now open the forum for a question and answer session. Ali?
Ali Yursar with the Rumi Forum. The tension in Turkey side is generally because of the response from the European Union. Why don't they clearly say no to Turkey? This is very important from Turkey side.
Why don't they say, forget it, you're never going to get in? Turkey has been granted candidate status. That's a legal position. So there has been an agreement. It would also require an agreement to revoke that. So Europe is not of one voice. As you pointed out, the UK is in favor, there are other countries that are in favor, and they don't want to see this process end. They think if you keep it quiet, put it on the back burner, Nicolas Sarkozy will not always be the president in France. He might come around. So I think it is, the Europeans would like to move forward. Not all Europeans. And I think they also very much want a constructive relationship with Turkey. So can they get their process moving forward in the face of opposition of a divided Europe? But I don't think that they're at all unified in thinking that they want to say no.
Is there any fear about Turkey's returning to the Islamic world or the Russia side?
Less about the Russia side. I think that particularly on energy issues, the way many Europeans look at Turkey is as an alternative to Russia. And I think that they don't see, I mean, Turkey is a NATO ally and has been for many years, and so even during the Cold War, and so they see Turkey in that context. In terms of Islam, and particularly radical Islam, I think you find a range of views in Europe. But I think generally this is not the concern. The concern that I have had expressed to me about the AK Party, for example, is not that they are closet Islamicists or want to take Turkey in a different direction. And in fact, I think that many of them see the AK Party as allowing more tolerance and more freedom in Turkey, and see it as a very good thing. What they do say is that the AK Party has been a party in power without an effective opposition for some time. And this is not good for any party. Every party should have a political opposition that can hold it to task, who can ask questions and challenge them in a political debating arena. And so I think that is the feeling. But I catch actually less concern about Turkey going towards radical Islam in Europe than I do here.
Mm-hmm. Next question.
Okay, Jenna Ledke with the Rumi Forum. Thank you so much. It was a very informative talk that you gave. I have two questions. I'm curious about, you were in Brussels recently. Did you hear anything about the recent developments inside Turkey about the letters that have been found, potential coup and whatnot? Because in the Turkish press there was, they spoke about the concern that the European Union has, some member states have about this situation,
Mm-hmm.
and also about Ergenekon, the deep state situation. So if you could speak about that, and then also if you could speak about those member states that are positive about Turkey's EU membership as well. Thank you.
Well, to answer the second question first, I think the most interesting one, of course, is Sweden. Because Sweden, as of a couple of days ago, is now in the EU presidency. And that means that they will have a leading role in EU foreign policy. And in fact, it has caused some tension between Paris and Stockholm. Because of the Swedes are quite blunt,
right,
that they would like to see this move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is of great advantage, because I think that as we head towards some of these deadlines at the end of '09, and as we have a push for a Cyprus settlement, on the Cyprus issue, we've been in this awkward situation since Cyprus joined the Union, where American policymakers look at the EU and say, well, Cyprus is in the Union, you should be able to solve this now. And the EU looks at the United States and says, they're in the Union, that means they have a veto, so we can't solve it. But the Swedes seem determined to try and push everyone together and really do a last push on the Cyprus issue. They will be in office until December 31st, '09. So I think that's one thing, and I think they're taking an extremely constructive attitude towards this. Some of the new members are also in favor of Turkey's joining. but they also have their own issues and problems inside. So it is, and the UK, of course, has been in favor. On Turkish domestic plots, if I can put it that way, I'm less familiar with the letters and didn't hear that much about that. I have heard some concern expressed about Ergenekon. Not that, I mean, the idea of a plot that comes out of the deep state, if I can put it that way, is not outside the realm of possibilities. The breadth of arrests and the way they widened over several months has raised some concerns, but not huge concerns. And I think everyone is waiting to see what is the evidence against specific individuals and how does this progress. What I did hear was also concern about the government's attitude toward Doğan media. And I think that this is actually the issue that is likely to cause more concern, because in many cases the tax levies are seen as unjust. And it's seen as an issue of, was Doğan media more critical of the government and therefore found itself in this situation? So I think you will see more European concerns expressed about those types of things.
About the military's involvement?
The EU's strict line is that there is no military involvement in politics. And anything that is...
Maybe on a broader perspective than this is.
Well, the EU has been, one of the forces that helped rewrite the Turkish constitution about the National Security Council. And I think that actually was one of the best things of this whole process. Mm-hmm. And I think the EU is looking for continued evolution. And there was a time when, I forget the exact instance, but it might have been during the possibility when the party could have been banned. And there were some rumors, and I remember Olli Rehn, the European Commissioner for Enlargement, speaking out very unusually for him and very bluntly about the need for the military to not participate in a political solution.
Fran, oh, you have a question? Yes, sir, go ahead.
Thank you. Michael Kurtzig, formerly with the Department of Agriculture, working on this problem. I was very surprised to hear that you didn't mention agriculture, which seemed to have been a major stumbling block with the common agricultural policy. Of course, Turkey's in the customs union. Turkey being a very large agricultural producer with great potential, although that potential is still to come around. I haven't seen it yet in 30 years, but it may still happen because it has so much land and so much water. And my understanding is that the objection of France and other countries is because of Turkey's agriculture. Is that still a central issue, or are the other ones that you mentioned more important?
I think the other ones that I mentioned in terms of culture and politics and things like that are more important. I think that if you talk to the average person in the street, they just are not interested in having, particularly in France, they're not interested in having Turkey come in. And some of it, to be frank, some of it is ethnic or racial. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things about the accession process is that once you decide to open a chapter, and the agriculture chapter is not open yet, once you decide to open a chapter, it becomes a matter of technical negotiation. Now, the countries at the end, the other member states may decide that they didn't like the way the agriculture negotiations went, etc., but everybody knows the rules. There may be some negotiation about how quickly Turkish wine, for example, could have access to the European market, but eventually it will have the same access as everybody else. So agriculture is important. If we can get the process started, I think we can reduce the tensions over agriculture and it becomes a technical issue.
Hi, thanks very much for coming. It's really interesting. I'm Cynthia Butler, I'm an attorney in town, so I'm interested in the procedural protocols of how you actually block 4 chapters. I mean, who did that? Did Sarkozy do that alone, or was that?
It only takes one.
Okay, all right. And so, and what was his excuse, his reason for just?
Those chapters are only for members. They are, if you take 35 chapters, and you think that, for example, only the member states should have the euro, then you can differentiate between those who have a potential to be members and those who do not. And if you think of this, and I think many Europeans would like Turkey to have some kind of close relationship, not just to be another country that's not in the Union, but some kind of privileged partnership, to use the phrase that I know many Turks don't like. Then, for example, Turkey could adopt many of these laws, but then they would not have to adopt some of the core ones that have to do with having a seat on the European Central Bank, for example. Now, for Turkey, the issue is, do you adopt all those laws and then you don't have a rule, you don't have a seat at the table? I think that's a very good question. So that's something that Turkey will have to think about and Europe will have to think about.
And just as a follow-up, did I hear you correctly? It's perhaps an intuition that if Cyprus falls, if Cyprus settles, that Sarkozy wouldn't have a leg to stand on, really? If they make peace with Cyprus and everything, the ports are opened and...
No, he could still block, because his rationale is that these 4 chapters are only for members, and that Turkey can negotiate as much as it wants and it won't be a member. So it can only negotiate the others. But if Cyprus is settled, it will start to change the balance of opinion. He will be the last
Holdout. Yes.
holdout, I think. You know, I mean, I think that's the way it's likely to be.
Okay.
Thank you. Fran has, staying with Sarkozy, just hard-nosed attitude, has he in fact formally offered a diluted form of association membership for Turkey?
Both he and Angela Merkel have indicated that that would be very worth discussing, and that that would be
Really?
an option that they would consider. Now, have they said, here's a proposal and this is what we would do and we're ready to sign if you agree to this? No. But
They floated the idea.
They floated the idea, yes.
I see.
Yeah.
And somebody mentioned Turkey being a great agricultural country.
Yes.
We were there just recently. I was very impressed by the industrialization of Turkey. I mean, and tourism, of course, is a
Yes.
major factor of GDP. Cars are being built, and also militarily, isn't Turkey one of the largest forces in NATO?
Yes, it is. Very
So it's
definitely.
not just agriculture, it's changed somewhat in the decades.
And in fact, this is one of the issues with Turkey and EU membership, as I referred to earlier in terms of population, but it's also true for all these other factors. Turkey is big.
It certainly is. And influential.
And influential. And it's influential in a neighborhood where the EU is not always sure it wants to be influential. But it's also this issue of, you suddenly have a country that has a bigger population than Germany. It has a military that is big, receives a good proportion of GDP, much more than any other NATO country. And Turks are not reluctant to send that military on missions when they believe that it's a justified mission. We've seen Turks taking a lead role in Afghanistan from time to time on the rotational basis. So, and there is, the Turkish economy does represent a competitive challenge for some other economies in Europe. I would argue that those economies are going to face that challenge anyway. And it's better to have Turkey in rather than out. At least then Turkey will be subject to the same environmental laws, protection laws on its factories, things of that sort. But I think there's no getting around the fact that one of the biggest problems for Turkey in the EU is the fact that it's big.
Will Turkey start to get impatient with this foot dragging and start to look eastward, at the Mediterranean, the Middle Eastern countries, the fellow Muslim countries, and they would welcome that, I suppose. I don't know.
I sense that Turkey is already impatient. And many of you have been there probably more recently than I have been and can speak to that, but I certainly do feel that. And it is complicated by the situation that it is the EU that holds all the cards. That Turkey must adapt to the EU's rules rather than negotiate them, if I can put it that way. Will Turkey turn east? I already see Turkey carving out closer relations with many of the countries in its immediate neighborhood. I think that's a good thing. Not as an alternative to the EU, but as a supplement to that. Turkey should not be only facing west. It should be facing west with a awareness and involvement in its neighborhood. Just as I would expect any EU country, you expect France to have involvement in the Maghreb.
Correct.
So I don't see that as a contradiction.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Burwell, for that keen insight. We were happy to have you here. Please come again.
Thank you very much.